All right, so into week 4 of 28-day fat loss, and at the time where we can have a few mindsets floating about. Some people can be going super hard and, thinking it's the last day on earth coming up and cutting calories by half and trying to get that a little bit extra just for those last few days. And we can, on the flip side, we can have people that feel like it's pointless, it's useless, it's nearly over, 28 days, nearly done. What's the point? I didn't get my results that I'd hoped for. So with both of those mindsets, I want everyone to remember that it's not the end, that everything continues, life continues. 28 days in the scheme of things is a drop in the ocean. I want people to just think that it's continuing as normal. So the processes that you put in place are continuing, just like your exercise has to continue next week, just like you have to still go to work next week. Everything continues as normal. However, that being said, if there are people that have been quite strict throughout the 28 days and you feel like you've nailed the plan, nailed the program, then that's a time when you want to consider coming out of a deficit. So you've just been losing fat for 4 weeks straight. Now, when you think about what a deficit is, it's our body taking on less fuel than what it should to operate well. So operating ideally requires us eating a certain amount of calories, and we call them maintenance calories. And that's where we're going to get our ideal functioning. So not just physical functioning, but also cognitive functioning. So for our body to be in a consistent deficit, a constant deficit, we're not functioning optimally. We'll be fatigued. It will affect our brain power on a daily basis. So it's good for us to go through phases of deficit to achieve what we want to achieve fat loss wise, but it's also good for us to have breaks from that deficit phase. So this is probably one of the most important things, or the most important thing to talk about during a 28-day fat loss. So I want you to have an open mind with this, and here's the reasons why. So the body goes through what's called adaptive thermogenesis. So basically, the metabolism adapts to how much you feed it. So if we're feeding it a certain amount and it's not enough to maintain our current weight, then our body will adapt its processes and adapt the energy expenditure. So it will reduce how many calories you burn in a day to adapt to what you're feeding it. Now, always important to show you examples. This is probably the hardest thing to convince someone to do when they're getting rip-roaring results, is to take a diet break and take a step back. But please be aware that this is in order to get better results long-term. I've done it myself, works really well, and I really want you to have a look at this study that I've been introduced to. This particular study was looking to reduce or minimize the metabolic adaptation that occurs. Now, this is straight from Sports Nutrition Association, and utilizing nutritional periodization with diet breaks. So periodizing calorie deficit phases with calorie or diet breaks. So they're basically going into calorie maintenance instead of calorie deficit. Now, if you look at this graph, this was the group that had diet breaks. So they actually did 2 weeks of diet, 2 weeks of diet break, and in total, they did 16 weeks of diet. Now, after that 16 weeks, they lost 47% more weight than the group that did a consistent deficit for 16 weeks. So they just maintained the deficit the whole way through. And you see that curve begin to plateau. And at the end of the day, the average weight loss was 11 kilos. I must point out this study was done on men. So this was obese men. So they've lost 11 kilos. So a huge calorie deficit for 16 weeks of fat loss, an average loss of 11 kilos. And this group lost an average of 15.5 kilos, roughly. So they lost 47% more weight than the group that didn't have any diet breaks. All right. Now, the really important part of this study comes next. So they actually found that the rebound, so here's the fat loss, here's the end of the study. They then went through an energy balance phase, and then they let them go. The follow-up 48 weeks into the study actually shows that this group, on average, were only 3 kilos down after 48 weeks, when they were 10 or 11 kilos down here. So they basically did a yo-yo effect and rebounded back up to here. The group that did the diet breaks, and they didn't have the same sort of rebound effect here. And by the end of the 48 weeks, they still had 11 kilos down. So massive difference between this one and this one in terms of how much the rebound was. And remember, this follow-up is just letting people go and live their life. They stayed down an average of 11 kilos. These guys stayed down an average of 3 kilos. When at peak, they were at 11. So crazy numbers there, huge. And here's really where they're suggesting the difference happened. So the most important thing to note here is that the group that did diet breaks, which was this one, had a resting energy expenditure decrease of about 200 calories. This group was down close to 600 calories. How does that turn into a rebound effect? Well, if your resting energy expenditure is now less and it's down here as opposed to being up here, then when you go and enjoy yourself and overeat, those extra calories that you get in will affect you more and will put fat on quicker. So you will store fat faster because you're eating even more calories than your body needs. So if your resting energy expenditure is 2,400 as opposed to being 2,800, then if you eat 3,000 calories, if your resting energy expenditure is lower, then you're in a bigger surplus. So you put on fat a bit faster. Hope that makes sense. Now, I have done this. I have tried. My protocol was 2 weeks of deficit, 1 week maintenance. Biggest difference I found was my energy levels were good. Strength was great the whole way through. So that 1 week of maintenance helped me to maintain energy and lift well, perform well. And when I went into a consistent deficit of 8 weeks, I felt a huge difference in strength. And some of the numbers on my lifting, whether it was all psychological or not, but some of my numbers were down about 30% when I did a consistent deficit as opposed to just having diet breaks after 2 weeks. So some pretty damning evidence there that is exciting. But what I need you guys to do is have a really open mind. And how do we make this work? How do we just say, okay, well, I'm going to stop my deficit. I'm going to stop my results, halt them for a week or 2 or 3 or whatever, however long you want that maintenance to be. I recommend starting with 1 week. I did 1 week. And the reason I chose 1 week is because I didn't feel confident enough to stick to maintenance calories for 2 weeks when I wanted to see results. So if you're the same, you don't think you can stick to 2 weeks of maintenance calories and you want to just do one, then that's fine. Remember, this is a trial period and I need you to be accurate. The more accurate you are with this, rather than just blowing out for a week, we want to try and just increase our calories a little bit. And that way we can be more accurate, see if it works, go back into deficit, reduce the metabolic adaptation that can happen